Sometimes love doesn't ask for permission. It just happens, in the soft glance that lingers too long, in the brush of a hand that feels like coming home, in the silence that speaks louder than words. This isn't a story about rules. It's about recognition, about being seen, not as a role, not as someone's past, but as a woman, alive, desired, chosen. He wasn't supposed to look at her that way, but he did. And once he did, the world they knew started to unravel, slowly, tenderly, beautifully. If you believe that real love often blooms in quiet places, and sometimes the deepest connection comes from the one person you were never supposed to fall for, you're in the right place. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with me, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a rediscovery of what it means to feel again. It started the way most forgotten things do, quietly. The days passed in the usual rhythm. Wake up early, tend to the tasks that no one else thinks twice about, be the reliable one, the listener, the helper. Years spent taking care of everyone else, and somewhere along the way, being seen became a luxury, not a given. People stopped noticing, not out of cruelty but out of habit. It's easy to become background in your own life. And then he walked in, not for her, just a visit, a polite hello, a familiar face. He was her best friend's son, grown now, taller, stronger, with that quiet confidence men don't know they're wearing. He hugged her the way people do when they haven't seen someone in years, casual, warm, innocent. But even then, there was a flicker, a pause, a second too long before he let go. Maybe imagined, maybe not. Days turned to weeks. He came by more often, always respectful, always smiling, asking how things were, offering help with things she didn't ask for. The way he carried himself, it wasn't arrogance, it was presence, that rare kind of man who didn't just talk to be heard. He looked people in the eye. He listened like words mattered, like they weren't just passing through his ears but sinking in. And one afternoon, something shifted. She was washing dishes, just another ordinary moment. He walked in behind her and said her name, soft but steady. She turned, and he was standing closer than usual. Not too close, not inappropriate, just intentional. Their eyes met, and this time neither of them looked away. It wasn't a glance, it was a revelation. There was something in his eyes that saw past everything, the years, the history, the careful roles they'd both played. He wasn't seeing the friend of his mother, or the woman who always brought a warm dish to the holidays. He was seeing something raw, something she had hidden so deep, she almost forgot it was there. She didn't speak. Neither did he. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full, like the kind of silence people share in churches or hospitals, something sacred and trembling. And then he smiled, small, knowing, and said, "You look tired, but beautiful, not pretty, not sweet, not the kind of compliment that's easy to dismiss." He said beautiful like he meant it, like he was naming something only he could see. It caught in her throat. Something in her wanted to cry, and she didn't even know why. It wasn't about his words. It was about being seen again, not as a caretaker, not as someone holding everything together, but as a woman with hunger, with depth, with silence that needed breaking. She tried to laugh it off, tried to shift the moment back into safe ground, but his eyes didn't move. He held her there in that space and gently said, "You don't have to pretend with me." And just like that, something cracked. It wasn't about age. It wasn't about scandal. It wasn't about right or wrong. It was about two people who had slipped between the cracks of their own lives and somehow collided in the space between duty and desire. He started coming by more often, helping with things she could easily do herself, fixing a loose drawer, changing a light bulb, bringing over coffee, and pretending it was for no reason. She stopped correcting him, stopped insisting she was fine. She let him stay, let him ask about her days, about her dreams, let him notice when she wore her hair differently, when her voice trembled, when her silence meant something. And one night late, After hours of talking by the fire, he reached across the space between them and touched her hand. Not possessive, not forceful, just a touch, steady, kind, the kind of touch that doesn't take, it invites. She looked at him, and there it was again, that gaze, that quiet insistence that she didn't have to vanish anymore, that someone saw her, all of her. Something inside her ached, not from loneliness, but from the sudden possibility that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late, that maybe everything she thought she had buried, longing, desire, the need to be held without purpose, wasn't dead, just dormant, and now, waking up, she didn't speak. Just let his fingers thread between hers, and when he leaned in, slow and deliberate, she didn't move away, not because she was swept up in fantasy, but because for the first time in years, she felt real. Felt wanted without being needed, felt chosen without being asked to prove anything. His lips brushed hers like a question, and when she answered, it wasn't with words, it was with surrender, with breath. With a trembling yes written in the way her body leaned into his. It wasn't about lust, not really. It was about recognition of being a woman again, not a shadow, not a helper, not a friend of the family. A woman, and in that moment, all the years of being invisible disappeared, and he saw her. The quiet was the first thing that started to change. It wasn't the kind that filled a room with loneliness or echoed through an empty home. It was a charged kind of quiet, the kind that settles between two people when something's beginning but no one wants to name it. He would come by with some excuse, bringing over leftovers from his mother's house, dropping off tools he claimed he no longer needed, offering to take out the trash like it was some noble act. She never asked, and he never pressed. But he stayed, always stayed a little longer than necessary. She'd fold the laundry at the edge of the couch, and he'd sit nearby, pretending to scroll through his phone, but every now and then she'd glance up and catch him watching. Not staring, watching, like he was trying to memorize the curve of her arm or the way her fingers moved across fabric. The smallest gestures held weight, and neither of them dared to touch the silence. There was one evening she remembers clearer than the rest. She was cooking, nothing elaborate, just dinner for herself, something warm, something familiar. He walked in without knocking, as he often did now, and leaned against the counter like it was the most natural thing in the world. She didn't look at him at first, just kept stirring the sauce, but she felt it, that quiet pull, the kind of awareness that makes skin sensitive, like even the air between them had a texture. His voice broke the silence, soft and casual. "Smells good." She smiled, still not turning. "It's just pasta. I haven't eaten yet," he said, and she heard the invitation buried beneath it, so she made extra. They ate at the small kitchen table, knees brushing beneath it without intention, or maybe with more intention than either of them admitted. They talked about nothing, about weather, work, the strange noise her fridge had been making, but the conversation wasn't what mattered. It was the spaces between the words that held all the tension, the way his eyes would linger just a second too long, the way her laugh came quieter now, like something inside her was afraid of waking the thing growing between them. He helped wash the dishes. She didn't stop him. They stood close, hands occasionally bumping, eyes occasionally meeting, and yet still, nothing was said. The days that followed carried that same hum. He'd sit beside her on the couch, not too close, but never far. Sometimes they'd watch a movie, and she'd feel the warmth of his arm just inches away and wonder what would happen if she let her hand fall a little to the left. She never did, but the silence grew louder. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, full of everything unsaid, of every glance that lasted too long, every breath that hitched when their fingers almost touched. Every night she went to bed wondering what it would feel like to stop pretending. One evening, the electricity went out. A storm had been circling all day, and by the time the lights blinked off, the house was wrapped in a deep, heavy dark. She lit candles. He was already there, said he didn't trust the roads in the rain, and asked if he could stay for a bit. She nodded. They sat in the dim, golden glow, and the shadows on his face made him look older, softer, impossibly familiar. He said her name quietly. She turned. He didn't move, didn't smile, just held her with his eyes and said, "Do you feel it too?" Her breath caught. There was no pretending now, no joke to make it easier, no task to distract them. She nodded. He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing the side of her face, not with urgency, with reverence, like touching something sacred. His thumb paused at the edge of her jaw, and he whispered, "I've tried to ignore it. I really have. So have I." She whispered back. The silence after that was different, not tense, not uncertain. It was still. Like the world outside had faded, and only this moment remained. He leaned in, not fast, not bold, just close enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath. And then he stopped, waiting, asking without words. She didn't speak either, just closed the space between them, just enough for her lips to brush his. And when they finally met, it was not rushed. It was not desperate. It was slow, deep, like two people remembering something they had never been allowed to know. And in that kiss, all the days of silence, of restraint, of longing, they didn't explode. They unfolded, softly, patiently, like a truth that had always been there, finally allowed to breathe. It was never about the moment itself. It was about every moment that led to it. And now, nothing would ever be the same again. It happened on a night that didn't ask for anything special. No music, no candlelight. Just the hush of a quiet room and the comfort of two people who had grown too used to dancing around what was already alive between them. The couch had grown familiar, his spot on one end, hers on the other. Always close enough for warmth, but far enough for safety. He was telling a story, something small, something funny about his week. His voice filled the space like it always did, smooth, easy, a kind of voice that made even silence feel full. She laughed at the right places, nodded, offered the kind of responses that kept it going, but her mind wasn't in the words, not really. It was in the space between them, in the way his fingers rested on the cushion beside her, in how her body was leaning just a little closer than before. Nothing had been said, nothing had to be. She was tired of pretending not to notice, not to feel it build every time his eyes softened in her direction, every time he lingered after dinner just a few minutes longer. There had been no grand confession, no urgent declaration, just presence, the kind that saw her even in her silences, especially in her silences. He stopped talking for a moment, and that pause, quiet, slow, held more weight than anything he'd said all night. His eyes drifted to hers, and this time she couldn't look away. There was something in his expression, something steady, that made her feel like the world outside had disappeared. He shifted closer. Just a breath, and then his hand reached out and found her shoulder. The touch was simple, gentle, but it wasn't casual. It didn't skim across her like so many others had done in passing. It stayed anchored. His fingers rested there like they were listening, not grabbing, not searching, just knowing. She didn't flinch, didn't move. The stillness in her body wasn't resistance. It was surrender, the quiet kind. The kind that comes when every wall begins to fall. Not from force, but from softness. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His thumb moved slowly, just a soft trace along the line of her shoulder, as if to say, "I see you." Not the version you show the world, not the caretaker, not the strong one, but the one who aches to be held and never has to explain why. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding for years. And in that breath, something broke. Not in pain, in release. He leaned in, but not quickly. It was the kind of closeness that unfolded like a question, like he wasn't taking, but offering. His forehead touched hers for a moment, and the world paused. Her eyes fluttered closed, not in fear, but in readiness. And when his lips found hers, they didn't crash. They arrived. There was no hunger in that kiss, no desperation, just a quiet, aching reverence. Like he had memorized every scar before ever touching her skin. Like he wasn't kissing for pleasure. He was kissing to give something back, something stolen by years of being overlooked, of being needed but never truly wanted. His hand didn't roam, it stayed at her shoulder, grounding her, telling her she was safe, and her heart, once buried beneath layers of caution, whispered yes, not the kind of yes that begs, the kind that breathes, that allows, that receives. He pulled back only enough to look at her. She opened her eyes, and there he was, looking not at her body, not at her age, but at her, like he'd always known, and in that look, she didn't feel pretty. She didn't feel useful. She felt chosen, not for what she gave, not for what she'd done, but for who she was when all the roles were stripped away. That night didn't ask for more. It didn't explode into something messy or wild. It settled, it sank deep into her skin like warmth after a long winter. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a return to herself, to feeling, to the quiet truth she'd hidden away for too long, and somehow he had found it. They didn't mean for it to happen. It wasn't planned or plotted or even allowed. They both knew the lines, the unspoken ones, the real ones, the ones etched by age and history and names that shouldn't be tangled. There were people who would whisper if they knew. There were relationships that could be broken. There were too many reasons to look away, to keep it polite, to walk the safer path, and still something deeper kept calling. It started in the quiet places, the way he would lean against the kitchen doorway just to watch her cook, the way his eyes lingered not with curiosity but with knowing. He wasn't fascinated, he was remembering. Like some part of him had seen her long before the world had given her a title. Not friend, not mother figure, not older woman, just her, raw, breathing, unhidden. They both felt it. They tried to ignore it. They tried to be careful, tried to smile when others were around, tried to leave space between them that didn't need to be explained. But space started to feel wrong, artificial, because something invisible kept pulling them back into the same room, into the same glances, into the same silence that felt more honest than anything either of them had spoken in years. They weren't reckless. They were slow, careful, tender. They never touched unless they had to, and yet, every time his hand brushed hers while passing a plate, every time his shoulder grazed hers while walking past in the hallway, it was like touching flame. Not burning, but waking up. They both carried it differently. He wore it like a weight in his chest. She could see it in the way his eyes flickered when he looked at her too long, the way he smiled with restraint, like he knew what it would cost to let it all out. And she wore it behind her ribs, buried beneath years of holding it together. But now it was rising, like hunger, like truth, like something that had never really died, only slept. There came a night when silence wasn't enough anymore. He had stayed late again, another excuse, another small task to finish, another reason not to leave just yet. She walked him to the door, told herself not to let her heart speak, told herself this was where it ended. But he didn't walk out. He turned and looked at her like he was seeing someone holy, and said her name like a confession. Then came the words neither of them had rehearsed. "I don't care about the rules anymore." She froze. Not because she didn't feel the same, but because hearing it said out loud made it real, and real meant dangerous. Real meant change. Real meant they couldn't go back. She didn't answer right away. She looked at him, this man she'd known for years, and saw someone who didn't see her as forbidden. He saw her as if she were oxygen, as if holding back had been suffocating both of them. And when she finally spoke, it was barely a whisper, "Neither do I." He stepped closer, not rushing, not bold, just real. His hands cupped her face, and his thumbs brushed away the fear that clung at the edges of her mouth. His kiss wasn't stolen, it was offered, and when she kissed him back, it wasn't defiance, it was homecoming. That night, they didn't need words. He didn't take anything. He gave her space to breathe. He gave her skin the chance to be touched without hesitation. He gave her back her name, not the one people used out of habit, but the one he spoke when their bodies were wrapped around each other in silence. And when he held her afterward, there was no shame, no apology. Just two people who had finally said yes to something they couldn't name, but had always known. This wasn't a story about rebellion. It was about recognition. About finding in someone else the mirror that doesn't lie, that doesn't flatter, that simply reflects the soul back as it is, scarred, tender, needing. With him, she didn't need to justify anything. Not her age, not her past, not her silence. She was simply allowed to be, to feel, to want, to be wanted in return, and for once that was enough, more than enough. Love doesn't always follow rules, but the real ones, they go deeper. It's not always loud. It's not always planned. Sometimes it's the quiet touch, the long glance, the whispered truth that finally sets you free. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you feel seen, known, remembered, then you know it wasn't just about them. It was about us, all of us who have loved in silence, waited too long, or finally said yes to something our hearts never forgot. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next story that touches exactly where you've hidden your truth. Because love isn't over, it's just waiting to be remembered.